She stood at the center of Fort Ironwood with a radio pressed to her ear, and the sign behind her screamed the words this base had lived by for 40 years. Women don't belong here. But the voice crackling through that radio belonged to a general, and the message was simple. Send nightfall. Now. The men surrounding her didn't know that yet. All they saw was a woman in their formation, dust on her boots, a call sign stitched over her heart that none of them had bothered to ask about. Sergeant First Class Peary jabbed a finger toward her chest, his voice tearing through the morning air, and the crowd behind him erupted like a struck match. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening. Her name was Sergeant Elena Cross. 3 years at Fort Ironwood. 3 years of being the punchline before she'd even opened her mouth. She'd graduated top of her class. She'd led convoys through terrain that broke stronger men. None of it mattered here, where the sign at the gate had been bolted up before she arrived, and no one had the courage or the desire to take it down. Peary's voice cracked across the yard again. You don't belong on this base, Cross. You never did. Behind him, dozens of soldiers pressed closer, their jaws tight, their eyes hungry for a fight that had been simmering for months. Somewhere in that crowd, a private named Reyes stood frozen, remembering the night Cross had pulled him out of a live-fire drill gone wrong, remembering how her hands hadn't shaken even when his had. He said nothing. Not yet. Elena felt the heat crawl up her neck. Her fingers tightened around the radio, the plastic biting into her palm. She thought about her mother, who'd told her that some rooms would never want her in them, and that the only answer was to become impossible to ignore. She thought about the tower behind her, watching over all of them, indifferent to whatever happened next. And she thought, just for a second, that maybe she should walk away. Maybe some battles weren't worth fighting in front of an audience like this. She didn't walk away. The radio crackled again, sharper this time, cutting through the noise of the crowd like a blade through canvas. Every head turned. The command channel didn't get used for nothing, and everyone on that base knew it. Elena's throat was dry. She thought she'd have more time before this call came. She was wrong. This is nightfall, she said, and her voice didn't shake. Send it. The general's voice filled the silence that followed, clipped and urgent, relaying coordinates, relaying a name that made even Peary's raised fist fall slowly to his side. A convoy pinned 300 miles east. Communications down. One officer alive who knew the terrain well enough to guide an extraction blind, in the dark, through territory that had swallowed 2 rescue attempts already that year. That officer's call sign was Nightfall. It always had been. It was the reason she'd been assigned to this base in the first place, though almost no one here had ever bothered to learn why. Dust drifted gold through the morning light. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The sign above them, no excuses, no weakness. Women don't belong here, seemed suddenly small, a piece of peeling paint against the weight of what was happening in front of it. Peary's hand dropped fully now, and something shifted behind his eyes, something between disbelief and the first tremor of shame. Your Nightfall, he said, like the word had never belonged in his mouth before, like he was tasting the size of his own mistake. I've been Nightfall since before I got here, Elena said quietly. You just never asked. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind moving across the tarmac and the distant hum of the watchtower's rotating beacon. Then Reyes stepped forward from the crowd, the private who remembered the live-fire drill, who remembered a hand that hadn't trembled. She pulled me out of a burning Humvee in March, he said, his voice unsteady but clear. Didn't hesitate once. One by one, quiet confessions rippled through the formation. Soldiers who'd trained under her, soldiers she'd talked off a ledge during their worst nights, soldiers who'd simply never spoken up because speaking up here had never felt safe. The crowd that had been baying for her humiliation minutes earlier now stood in a different kind of silence, the kind that comes when people realize they've been cheering for the wrong side of history. Here was the question worth sitting with. How many capable people had this base already lost, simply because no one had bothered to ask their name before deciding they didn't belong? Elena didn't wait for an apology. She didn't need one. She turned toward the command vehicle already rolling onto the tarmac, radio still in hand, boots already moving toward the men 300 miles east who needed Nightfall more than this base needed to be right. Peary caught her arm, not to stop her, but to say the only thing that mattered. Bring them home. She did. 6 hours later, Under a sky gone black and starless, Sergeant Elena Cross guided a broken convoy back across terrain that had taken two better-funded attempts and given nothing back. When she returned to Fort Ironwood at dawn, dust-covered and hollow-eyed, someone had already climbed the sign at the gate and covered the last line with a strip of gray tape. Underneath, in marker still wet, someone had written 4 new words. Nightfall brought them home. Because respect doesn't announce itself with permission. It arrives quietly, in the moment someone finally proves what they always knew about themselves. And somewhere on that tarmac, under a sign still half-covered in old cruelty and new truth, a woman who was told she didn't belong became the only reason anyone made it home at all. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments what Nightfall means to you. And if you believe courage doesn't ask for permission, hit subscribe, because we've got more stories like Elena's waiting to be told.